Being out on the land, rotating a mob of herbivores across your pasture in sync with nature, observing the different plant species and wildlife species is one of the most intimate affairs that I think we can have with nature. And today I'm going to talk about the one tool that makes it economically viable for anyone to do. How's it going, folks? I'm Cam Griffin from Benui Family Grazing. Welcome to the channel where I talk all things ruminants and grass. So to add a little bit of context to today's topic, one of the key principles of regenerative grazing is that we're trying to mimic the natural patterns that herbivores used to graze in for hundreds of thousands of years, which put simply is being in a tight mob in high stock densities and constantly moving. And the cascading benefits of just those two things, not only to our on-farm ecology, so our soil health, but also to our farm profits, are quite significant. And never before in recent history have we been able to duplicate these patterns so effortlessly until now with high-tech modern electric fencing. Historically, what kept animals in a tight bunched mob was predatory pressure, such as wolves and lions, and climatic factors, so fires and floods that used to move mobs of animals around the continents. And then many years later from that, as we started to domesticate animals, we would have of course had our shepherds and our cowboys who would have had dogs trained to keep the animals in a tight group. So we do use quite a bit of electrified high tensile plain wire. Usually on our perimeters we'll have a single strand of offset wire, and then we'll use plain wire as well to further subdivide up a farm. So if we get a farm that's, let's just say, 100 acres, then we'll use plain wire to divide it up into maybe 5 or 6 more paddocks, and then from there they're really great to anchor off and power up our poly braid. And the poly braid is the real game changer. It's a mixture of polyethylene strands, which gives it that strength and rigidity, braided with usually between 5 and 9 metal filaments. And those metal filaments, depending on what brand you go with, are usually stainless steel or copper, and they deliver the electrical pulses from your energizer through that line out into the paddock where it shocks your cattle. And the combination of those two things is what really makes for a pliable and potent material. But what causes a 5, 6, 700 kilo beast to shy away from a piece of string? And the simplest way to answer that is discomfort. So our poly braid usually carries a charge of around 7.5 to 8,000 volts, and while that might seem like enough to kill a baby rhinoceros, there's no amperage behind it to cause any health issues. Really, it's just a few seconds of memorable discomfort, and after touching it 3, 4, 5 times, the animal starts to associate touching that white piece of string with pain, and just like that, you've developed a psychological barrier. And I get pretty hyped up talking about it because after 3 or 4 years of trying to develop my own regenerative grazing operations, I realized what a distinct advantage this is. And so the huge difference between a psychological barrier like our poly braid and a physical barrier like our 4-strand barbed wire is that it's the animal that's deciding, it's making the conscious decision not to go past that point. It's a fence that the animal is not even touching. So unlike a physical barrier, where when you're setting up the fence, you're investing in materials, barbed wire, star pickets, steel, that are going to physically hold a 600 kilo animal back. That can become quite expensive when you're investing in materials that are going to physically hold a mob of animals back. And so a psychological barrier is a barrier that the animal is not even touching because they've made the conscious decision not to go past that point. And once they've made that decision, you don't have to go out and invest in heavy materials that are going to physically hold back an animal. And I will just say that it is really important to have a good perimeter fence. So I'm not against people doing barbed wire there. Some of our lease blocks have barbed wire along our perimeter. We've got some perimeters that are 4 or 5 strands of high tensile electric fence. I'm more just talking about your internal paddock divisions, which we can make really economically with electric fence. So we start that psychological process pretty early as cattle join our grazing program. So as I have in another video, They come into our yards. I usually stick a single strand of poly braid around the inside, and from there they start to associate that braid with that discomfort and with that pain, and they start learning early on. So once they come out into our paddock, it's smooth sailing from there, and we can rotate our cattle. And the flexibility that poly braid provides, I mean, to have 600 meters of a psychological barrier on a single reel, which you can reel up in a matter of seconds, I think is pretty amazing. So you can graze areas of your farm that you've never grazed before, maybe because, you know, that fence always gets flooded and it's not worth fencing. You know, you can make laneways, you can shift cattle from farm to farm, go across roads, take them wherever you need without having to, you know, get other people to help you muster them over. If it's just you, which a lot of the time it's just me, and I'm trying to move cattle around, and I can move cattle to wherever I need. I can make whatever pathway I need to get them there, and I'm confident that they'll follow it. And of course, in practicing this kind of holistic grazing, we're always varying the size of our paddocks depending on how fast the plant is regrowing, and that's something that you're really only going to be able to do with temporary electric fencing and that poly braid. So we use the poly braid and our step-in posts, our Gallagher posts, and we can vary the size of our paddocks to how big we need and how long we want to graze a certain block. So I hope that provided some insight for you guys, and if you got some value from it, hit that subscribe button, it goes a long way, and stay tuned for a video where I'll talk about the different products that I use, the different types of braids, the step-in post and the energizers, which I use for our grazing operations. Until then, I'll see you later. Catch ya.